So, we are here in a Buddhist center, actually. And as we've seen, we are not talking about, any kind of Buddhism, but we are dealing with basically this tradition, which is the Theravada tradition, in the Burmese lineage of Mahasi Sayadaw. And we all know that Buddhism is a very wide phenomena. But anything and everything I will say is based on the canonical suttas, which are the discourses of the Buddha, which he gave a long time ago, 2,600 years ago. That's quite a while ago. And how do we know that actually the Buddha said those things? Well, we will never know for sure. That's the truth of it. But we have very different sources, which are in the Pali language, in Chinese, in Tibetan, in Sanskrit. And what is quite reassuring, or interesting anyway, that all these sources say just about the same things. So as we all know, in any kind of subject that we study, we get different sources. If the different sources say just about the same thing, they're quite reliable, and we can be pretty sure that, okay, maybe he actually spoke those words and taught those things. That's as far as we can go. Because, as we all know, all the teaching was an oral tradition, basically. The Buddha didn't write anything. We do not know whether he could read or write. Because in those times, he was quite a well-off person, a prince or something like that. He didn't need to know how to read or write, basically. So the teaching was given during talks. The yogis would listen and learn by heart the talk. So they could teach it again to their pupils, basically. That's the way. Maybe, but that's not sure from a historic point of view, 3 to 6 months after the Buddha's, not death, but parinibbana, there was the first council where all these fully awakened pupils, they had to be arahant to go to that council, otherwise they wouldn't take them. They just recited in the whole all the suttas of the Buddha, which were then taken as canonical teachings, and they were passed on from generation to generation, actually. So that's as far as we can go. So a long time ago. Anyway, what's really important about these things is that in these suttas we find the why, the how, the when of the practice. That's our own interest, basically. And the Buddha, in a way, is very clear about his own teaching. I teach one thing and one thing only, dukkha dukkha nirodha. I just teach suffering and the end of suffering. Please don't ask me anything else, because I'm not interested. It was very, very concise, in a way. And first of all, we know that Buddha that's a title given to somebody who has seen or has realized the truth. So the Buddha, first of all, has had an experience firsthand. He doesn't just talk because of hearsay or... No. He's really had a real experience. And then he spends his life teaching other people about that experience. But in this tradition, the Buddha doesn't have really the power to enlighten than anybody else. You can just teach the way, and then through our own practices we can get enlightened. We have to do the work. That's the thing, you know. Other traditions have different views about these things, which are totally okay by me. But in this particular tradition, no. The role of the Buddha is the role of a teacher. He will show you the way. You have to walk the path. By walking the path shown by the Buddha and all the Buddhas that came before him, you gain realization, freedom from suffering, which is not a bad idea, in my own estimation. And you gain realization or freedom from suffering by seeing clearly in what is called the Dhamma. You know, the word Dhamma has got very different meanings, you know. The Dhamma that we're talking about here is that universal law of the universe. Truth. That's the Dhamma. And by seeing deeply and clearly into the Dhamma, one frees himself from, or herself from, the samsaric suffering. Existence, basically. What is this universal law of the Dhamma? You already know, but I'm going to tell you again. It's that all conditioned things are impermanent. That's this universal truth, and bear in mind that is, besides the fact that a Buddha appears and proclaims it. It is independently of a Buddha, of the coming of a Buddha. The law of the Dhamma just is. It's an eternal law, always there to be discovered. So the Buddha just shows the way to the deep realization of the Dhamma. How do we do that? By following the teaching of the Buddha, which, to keep it really concise, consists of not just meditation, because the word in Pali is bhavana. Bhavana is usually roughly translated as meditation, but actually it's not correct. We could translate it as inner training, mental training. Meditation is part of it, but not just meditation. For example, we know that there is this part about morality or ethical conduct, which is sila, keeping the precepts. That's the basis of the practice. Not so popular in the West, but anyway, that's the basis, you know. Because the practice of sila or morality creates an inner and outer environment of safety. Well, usually here in the retreat center we feel quite safe, because by keeping the precepts, each and every yogi actually is creating by his own behavior this safe place. I don't have to watch my back. You know, people are not going to steal things from me. You know, you know what I mean. So that's the basis. In that, let's call it safe place, the practice of meditation can take place. So the mind, which is usually very unstable and basically poisoned by the three poisons, which are greed, anger, and delusion. In this safe place, the mind has got a chance to cool down and slowly get more and more quiet. The image which is usually used is that of a lake or some sort of water, which is very unstable usually and murky with mud. But if you just let it be by itself, clearer and clearer and clearer, because all the mud will fall to the bottom of the lake or pond or whatever. And thanks to that quiet, which is basically samatha, the practice of insight can take place, because the water is clearer. You can see deeper and in a much clearer way. And that is development of basically insight and wisdom, which is ultimately what frees us. But it's not really correct, because it's all these things together which make possible, the arising of wisdom. Actually, you can't have one without the other. It's we would really love to just sit 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night, and that's it. We get enlightened. Well, maybe. We never know, huh? It's just causes and conditions coming together. We have no idea whatsoever. We really have no idea. We know very, very little. We do not know that much about this stuff, but we have to show up to the practice, yes. Otherwise, we are sure that nothing will happen. Yesterday I was talking about going to the pond to fish and that sort of stuff. That's a nice image to me. You have to show up. If you want to catch a fish, you have to go fishing. The fact that you go fishing doesn't really, make you sure that you will catch a fish. But if you do not go, you are totally sure that you will not get a fish. It's pretty sure. So that's about it. So the Dhamma, this universal law, which is all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. By seeing deeply into this eternal law, we gain realization or freedom from suffering. How do we do that? We've just seen that. We need sila, we need practice, we need insight, development of wisdom, all these nice things that come together as causes and conditions, and then when the time is right, practice comes to a level of fruition. There's a fruition of the path. Very interesting. In this tradition, the liberation is seen as a process with different levels to it. So we basically free ourselves from greed, anger and delusion in different stages, at different depths, we could say, which is another good news to me. It's not all or nothing, but you can be, a bit better. Why not? You practice a little bit, you get a little bit of benefit. Usually, again in the Thai tradition, again, I think Achan Cha, you let go a little bit, you gain a little bit. You let go a little bit more, bit more freedom. Let go everything, go on to the other shore. It's true. Basically, it's true. But this I, me mind is not really convinced. It's hold on to it. It's as tight as you can for as long as you can. Yes, of course. Why? Because we are ignorant. We are very confused about the real nature of things. It's the Dhamma is not really clear to us. That this all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Well, maybe, but never mind. Got more important things to do. I, me, mine, I, me, mine, I, me, mine, all the time. This. But anyway, so those were a few points which might be interesting and useful to keep in mind. And Now I want to come tonight to this particular sutta, which is the Kalama Sutta, which is really exemplary in a way about this sort of teaching. You probably already know this thing by heart. Rather. Bear with me and be patient. I'm going to expound on it a little bit. Once upon a time, there was this, clan of people called the Kalamas. And they were, well, first of all, they were not disciples of the Buddha. They were just regular people in a village. Imagine that, And the Buddha happened to be traveling in that part of India. And it seems like he already had quite a reputation. I mean, the Buddha. And so the Kalama thought, let's ask him. He seems to be quite a good teacher. Because we are doubtful. We are not really sure because, all these spiritual teachers pass through town and they teach different things. And we do not really know what to do. We are doubtful. Now there is one thing that all these different teachers had in common. They were teaching different things, yes, but they had one thing in common. And they taught the people their own doctrines, promoting and praising their own doctrines, and tearing down the views of their opponents. Meaning, I'm the one who knows the truth. Drop all the others, follow me. And the Buddha doesn't do that. The only one who doesn't do that. It's quite interesting. It doesn't say, drop the others, follow me, nonsense, or the other. No. It's really... He actually says, I'm quoting here, it's fitting for you to be perplexed, addressing the Kalamas. It's fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen about a perplexing matter. So, it's good to be doubtful. It's not a problem. And then he said to the Kalama, do not go by oral tradition, what's been passed down through one generation of teachers to another. Don't depend upon a lineage of the teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of texts, by logic and inferential reasoning. Don't believe a teacher just because he's very elegant, eloquent, and very impressive. And don't even believe somebody just because you think that he is your teacher. So, be doubtful. It's good to be doubtful. And then he follows. The Buddha then says, when you know for yourselves these things are unwholesome, these things are blamable, these things are blamed by the wise, these things followed up lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. And then he used a common sense way of questioning, typical of the Buddha. So he asked the Kalama, what do you think when greed, hatred, and delusion arise in you? Does it lead to your welfare or to your harm? The Kalamas were quite intelligent. They said, no, it will lead to my own harm. As I was saying in the other class, if we were to ask this question today, in the world outside there, maybe we would get a different answer. They heard me, tooth for tooth. Kill them all. That's the way to go. Very laughable, but very true. and very common. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Anyway, I'm digressing. They said it leads to harm. Then the Buddha said, a person who was greedy, hating and deluded, overpowered by greed, hatred and delusion, motivated by these mental forces, will destroy life, steal the belongings of others, commit sexual misconduct, speak lies, and will also persuade others to act in the same way. So, will that lead to his harm and suffering for a long time? And the answer is yes, of course. And then the opposite, of course, as typical of the teaching of the Buddha. Then the Buddha speaks about a person who was without greed, without hatred, without delusion. So when the mind is free from greed, hatred and delusion, does it lead to one's well-being or to one's harm? It leads to one's well-being, of course. And the person without greed, hatred and delusion will avoid taking life, stealing, sexual misconduct and false speech, and persuade others to do likewise, and that will lead to their welfare and happiness for a long time. So we see from this sutta that the Buddha is instructing these people to see for themselves, to verify for themselves, not to believe him or anybody else, but to be responsible. It's really interesting to me. And in a way, this is the essence of the Buddha's teaching, to overcome and to eliminate greed, hatred, and delusion. The three poisons. These are what the Buddha calls the three unwholesome roots. They are the roots of all the other disturbing and distressing mental states. All arise and are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. They are the underlying motives for all types of unwholesome action. And so, the ultimate aid of the Buddha's teaching is to overcome and actually to eradicate and eliminate greed, hatred, and delusions. As we all know, we have to see and verify for ourselves what is actually greed, what is actually hatred, and what is actually delusion. Now, about greed, I find this very interesting. Usually we have this idea of being greedy, attached to things, it's it's all that, of course, but actually what is implied, or not really implied, but thought as greed, is, we could define it as a very ancient habit in the mind to seek pleasure and satisfaction in sensual stimuli or objects. That's basically greed for the Buddha. We are really convinced that by seeking satisfaction through the senses, we will be at peace. Unfortunately, it's a never-ending story, because one after the other, you are never really totally satisfied. That's the idea of dukkha. You are never really satisfied. There is always something not quite right. Sort of a basic distaste or something around those lines. Just something not really fitting. No, as much as we try, it's because things change. That's the Dhamma. Every conditioned phenomena changes, is impermanent. The only unchanging is, of course, Nibbana. The unconditioned is not conditioned. So that's where we seek true refuge. But of course, first of all in the Dhamma. And by seeing deeply, very many times, into the Dhamma, we realize freedom from suffering. That's the gist of it, I mean, it's just really seeing, not in a conceptual way, of course, These are not concepts, these are realities, It's just, oh, yes, it's really real. Like, who would have thought? Like, conditioned phenomena change all the time. Wow. So, why get attached? It's no use. Totally useless. It'll change anyway. Why do you build this something out of nothing? Basically. But of course, we already know these things from an intellectual point of view. It's not such a big mystery. We didn't need to wait for the Buddha to tell us these things. Things change. Oh yeah, right. As if I didn't know about that. It's not really just that, It's because you are not seeing clearly into that you have certain behaviors which are basically the three poisons: greed, anger, and delusion, which basically cloud the mind and make you act in a very unwholesome way, producing basically suffering for yourself and others. So that's why it's called Vipassana or Satipattana Vipassana, seeing repeatedly, very many times, in depth. What? The Dhamma, of course. The way things really are. That's just about it. It's not so complicated. Not easy though. Then we have another sutta, which very briefly I may tell you about. It's a conversation, it's dialogue, a conversation that the young Brahmin was having with the Buddha. And this young Brahmin, being a young Brahmin, was challenging the Buddha, trying to trap him in a way. But then the Buddha replied to this young Brahmin, until the young Brahmin became interested in the teaching of the Buddha and asked him, okay, teach me. It's really funny. And the question he asked the Buddha was, actually, how does the discovery of truth take place? How? How do you do it? That's a very direct question. How do you do it? Okay, there is a truth. By seeing this truth, I become liberated. How do you do that? And this is a really important aspect of the teaching of the Buddha, because it is a very different way from the usual way. And because this liberation doesn't come simply from believing the Buddha and accepting the Buddha as the enlightened one, but the truth is something that one has to realize for oneself. How do you do it? Okay, we have a few points. This is the reply of the Buddha. 1. First, a yogi or a seeker should go to somebody who's reputed as to be a teacher and investigate that teacher. Observe him. his behavior, how he talks. Does he really walk the talk? That's the idea. That's number one, okay? You need a teacher. Go find a teacher and don't just accept him, but watch him, possibly. Okay. 2, by doing this, maybe, but usually, then this yogi gains faith in that teacher. He visits him and pays respect to him. 3, then one listens to that teacher, and one listens, then one hears the Dhamma, the teaching of that teacher. And having heard the Dhamma, one retains it in mind. You will remember it. And one examines the meaning of the teachings. So you actually hear the teaching, you remember the teaching, and you think about it. Is this something that makes sense? Yes, no, not so convinced, but you don't just blindly accept it. You know, it's a process, actually. You know. Then, when one examines the meaning of the teachings, then one is willing to accept those teachings as a result of the examination. Say, okay, makes sense. I'm willing to accept this teaching. When one accepts the teachings, then there arises a desire to realize the truth. And when that desire arises, then one applies the will. This is extremely important, you know. Having applied the will, again, one investigates the teaching now at a deeper level. What is actually meant by applying the will is actually practicing meditation and developing the insights. Having done that, again, you will re-examine the teaching, but from a deeper point of view. Not just from an intellectual point of view, but from a much deeper place, you know, which is not conceptual, but is based on the insights which you go through in the practice. Like, oh yes, something along those lines. Yes, oh yeah, of course. I could have been so stupid for so long. It's so self-evident. It's what an idiot I was. He says, years and years of being so stupid. That's the way it goes. Having examined the teachings at that level, one strives, and then by striving, this would apply to the development of deep insight meditation. One personally realizes the supreme truths and sees it by penetrating it with wisdom. Penetrating wisdom usually is used. You know, it cuts through. In this way, there is the discovery of truth. The truth that the Buddha is teaching is the truth about human existence, particularly those truths that will enable us to liberate ourselves from suffering, meaning I teach one thing and one thing only, dukkha dukkha nirodha. All conditions, phenomena are impermanent. Strive on, be a lamp upon yourself. Those were his last words, roughly. You know, so I leave no senior teacher or anything like that. You know, it's I taught you. I gave you the teachings. Remember this: all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on. Be a lamp upon yourself. You know. Be an island upon yourself. It's quite interesting. You know, it's quite straightforward, not mysterious in any way. You know, I have shown you the way. Now go walk. There's no other way. You know? Well, we're always looking for maybe a better way, or a quicker way, or maybe I haven't really understood well. Another Dhamma talk. I mean, which is understandable, of course. There must be a reason why the Buddha, I mean, he talked for 40 plus years after his own enlightenment. So it must have been useful somehow, otherwise he would have kept silent. No use in talking, bye-bye. No. He actually was talking and teaching for 40 plus years. A long time, really long time. And he was the Buddha. So he must have seen some sort of usefulness to that, I guess. Otherwise he wouldn't have done that. Why bother? So that's the idea. Any questions? Of course not. It's so clear. I mean, crystal clear. Just practice. Just go and do the practice. And strive on. But I mean, of course, I'm just joking. It's if you have any doubts that I might be able to. Sometimes languages, and it's not easy. I'm trying to make it as concise, as clear as possible. So, there is Buddhism, there is the Buddha, there is the Dhamma, which is this universal law, which is always there. By realizing the Dhamma in depth, we gain realization or freedom from suffering. Okay? Then we get into the specifics. Okay, how do we do that? Okay, well and good. How do we actually do that? Well, you follow the teachings of the Buddha, which is not just meditation, but you need sila or morality, at least a little bit. You need the practice, which is not an intellectual practice. Not at all. It's another way. We do not realize these truths by thinking about them. No. Thinking is nice and is useful up a certain point. And then you say, okay, I agree with this. Let's go. Then you start the practice. Okay? You just get out of your head, out of concepts, and get closer and closer and closer to ultimate realities, which is, quite frankly, quite down to earth. You're sitting there, your belly goes up and down, okay? Is that a concept? No. Can you feel it? Yes. Good. That's all. Stay with this. Not think about this, just feel it. You have to feel it. You see, we want to use these terms, the elements. Is it soft? Is it hard? Cold? Hot? Does it move? Those are the elements. It's and then, after a while, a question usually comes up in the mind. I know you've had this question. Who is watching? Have you ever had this funny thought in your mind? At a certain point it comes. You say, oh, who's watching who? Who's watching what? I mean, am I watching something? Is something watching me? What the hell is going on? Again, that's intellectual, just keep going. Just keep going, in a way, But it's just, these are just the basics, but not just the basics. This is it. Get out of your head, out of concepts, out of conceptual reality. It's get down to the the primary elements, what makes up everything, like it's like, okay. And this is really something that doesn't really come immediately as an attitude, just be with it. I mean, what do you mean, just be with it? I have to understand how does this actually happen, how does it work? I say, oh, no. Just let it be and be with it and watch it. No? Usually at the beginning we are not so convinced. It's just, what does it actually mean? Just be with it and watch it? I've been watching this all my life. Not really. You've been watching a concept, not a reality. No? Just thoughts are just thoughts, like sounds. And yet, we think, I have thought that. Oh yes, great idea. So that can be really in the practice. I think that can be really useful. Just consider thoughts. Same thing as sounds. Same value. Usually we are not so convinced in the beginning. Sounds are sounds, but thoughts are thoughts. Being thinking. It's just as a big experiment. It's just try and get back to just this sitting, just this walking, just as a very brief sort of an experiment. Okay, just for this one sitting, I'll just try and see thoughts as noise in the mind. And they're not mine, by the way. You can just, play these games like, I haven't thought these thoughts. It's my next door neighbor. They're not mine. His or hers. Seems funny like that, but it's one way to go about it. Just we give so much importance to this. I need an explanation, and the whys and the hows, and where does this come from, where this will lead me. Of course, nowhere. It's always here and now. It doesn't come from anything. Just this could be useful, it comes from the suttas, I guess. Just dhammas arising and ceasing. Nothing more, nothing less. Dhammas in this particular context means conditioned phenomena. Just dhammas arising, just dhammas ceasing. Nothing more, nothing less. Not mine. Just dhammas arising, just dhammas ceasing. That's all. When we remember about that, it's actually helpful. But we seem to be very forgetful. Usually we forget. You must, bring back the mind to this sort of, it's basic, very basic, sort of way to go about things. Just dhammas arising and ceasing. I'm not doing anything. Just being, just laid back and watching all this process going on. Don't take it personally. Which is possible, by the way, when we actually do that. It's much more a sort of a flowing kind of experience, when we get blocked into this I, me, mine, really fatiguing and stressful dukkha. That's it for tonight, I would say. Any questions? Okay? Then we can walk for 15 minutes and then come back for the metta. Okay? Thank you for your patience and practice. See you very soon.